Mafia, Murder, Mayhem. Part 4 of 4. The town of Cicero was once a peaceful community located in Cook County, Illinois, just west of Chicago. But as the 20th century progressed, this quiet suburban town became one of the most violent mafia hotspots in America. And to this day, it's considered one of the most corrupt towns in American history. So what made this quiet little town such a great place for mobsters to thrive? And why is it still considered one of the most corrupt towns in America? Well, let's take a look at the rise and fall of the mob in Cicero, Illinois. Cicero had always been an unincorporated community since being established by French fur traders in the early 19th century. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, it remained a relatively quiet town until after the end of World War II. After the war, there were lots of veterans who had served in high-ranking positions within organized crime that were looking for a place to settle down. They needed somewhere where they could set up shop and start making money. Somewhere with low police presence and loose regulations. And that's when they set their sights on Cicero. Cicero was the perfect place for mobsters. Because there was no actual town government, it was essentially overseen by the Cook County Sheriff's Department, which was notoriously corrupt. Not only were there no local law enforcement officials, but there were very few state or federal law enforcement officials who would step foot in Cicero, even though it was right on the outskirts of Chicago. Back then, the FBI cared more about what was happening during the Cold War and didn't really care too much about the mob. So the mobsters felt like they had free reign over Cicero, and they wasted no time setting up shop and cementing themselves as the leaders of the town. After World War II, one of the largest criminal organizations in the world began to form in Cicero. This organization was called the Chicago Outfit. The Chicago Outfit was a criminal syndicate composed of Italian-American mobsters from various gangs and families who had united together under one banner. Together, they formed a structure similar to that of the Mafia in Italy. Their leader was a man named Paul Ricca. He took the title of consigliere, or counselor. Under him were 4 men who held the title of capo regime, or heads of the family. These 4 men were Sam Giancana, Tony Accardo, Paul Scrappo, and Joseph Friola. Together, these 5 men controlled the Chicago Outfit. They had come together in Cicero because of the lack of law enforcement and the abundance of opportunities. When they first moved into town, they took over all of the bootlegging operations. At the time, alcohol was illegal, so there was a lot of money to be made selling illegal liquor. However, there were already people in Cicero who had been making money selling illegal liquor for years. These people were called the brewers. They weren't part of the Chicago Outfit, but they were the ones who had been running the town before the mobsters showed up. So the mobsters had to get rid of them. There are many stories about how the mobsters got rid of the brewers, but we don't know which ones are true and which ones are false. Some stories say that the mobsters simply bought out the brewers. Other stories say that the mobsters used violence to get rid of the brewers. There's even a story that says that the mobsters buried some of the brewers alive. We don't know which story is true, but we do know that after the brewers were gone, the mobsters took over all of the bootlegging operations in Cicero. And it wasn't just bootlegging that they were involved in. They were also involved in gambling, prostitution, loan sharking, and extortion. They ran illegal casinos and brothels. They lent money to people at exorbitant interest rates and then threatened them when they didn't pay back the loans. They extorted money from businesses, and they even rigged elections. In fact, they controlled Cicero like it was their own personal fief. If you didn't cooperate with them, they threatened to kill you. If you did cooperate with them, they still threatened to kill you. Basically, if you lived in Cicero and you didn't want to be a mobster, your life was pretty difficult. The mobsters were so powerful that the police couldn't do anything to stop them. The sheriff's department was completely corrupt. They either didn't want to get involved or they were getting paid off by the mobsters. That meant that the mobsters could operate with impunity. They could commit crimes and the police would do nothing. The situation was so bad that people started leaving Cicero. They either moved away or they pretended to move away while actually staying in town and going into hiding. The population of Cicero declined rapidly. By the 1960s, the town was basically a ghost town. It was almost entirely made up of mobsters and their families. The mobsters had won. They had driven everyone else out of town. But their victory was short-lived. Soon enough, the feds got involved. As it turned out, The FBI had become interested in the activities of the Chicago outfit. They had been watching them for years, and they were finally ready to make a move. In the early 1960s, the FBI began arresting mobsters left and right. They arrested the brewers who had been taken out of power, and they arrested the mobsters who had replaced them. Suddenly, the Chicago outfit didn't have its top earners. They didn't have their leaders. They were in disarray. Without their leaders, the Chicago outfit couldn't function. They couldn't make any money. They couldn't pay their dues. They started to crumble. And by the late 1960s, they were pretty much done. They didn't disappear entirely, but they never regained their former power. Cicero was no longer a mob town, but the damage had already been done. The town was in ruins. The economy was in shambles. The infrastructure was crumbling. It looked like a ghost town. And to this day, it still looks like a ghost town. Most of the buildings are boarded up. Most of the streets are empty. There are more rats than people in Cicero. So why is Cicero still considered one of the most corrupt towns in America, even though the mob is gone? The answer is simple. The corruption didn't end with the mob. When the mob was finally driven out of town, the people who replaced them were just as corrupt. The new government officials were just as corrupt as the mobsters had been. They were just better at hiding it. Over the years, Cicero has been plagued by corruption scandals, mayor scandals, police scandals, fire department scandals. It seems like no one is immune to the corruption in Cicero. In recent years, Cicero has been trying to clean up its act. They've been cracking down on corruption. They've been trying to attract new businesses and new residents. But it's hard to shake a reputation. Cicero will probably always be known as the mob town. And now you know why. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and learned something new about the most corrupt town in America. Make sure to check out our other videos and leave a like if you did enjoy this video. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. But until next time, this is Cicero, Illinois, signing off.